The clang of hammer against steel, once Magnus Thorn's symphony, now echoed his despair. Each strike was a reminder of what he had lost, a haunting melody that played in the shadows of his mind. A year had passed since the fire, a year since his world turned to ash. The flames had consumed not just his workshop, but the very essence of his being, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man he once was. Smoke still stained his soul, the scent of charred wood a constant reminder of his loss. His hands, once skilled and steady, now trembled with the weight of memories too painful to bear. Villagers avoided his gaze, their whispers like embers in the wind. They spoke of him in hushed tones, as if his tragedy was a curse that could be caught by mere association. He was a pariah, haunted by the ghosts of his past. The shadows of his former life clung to him, a constant reminder of the happiness that had slipped through his fingers. His forge, once a beacon of warmth, now stood as a monument to his grief. The tools lay untouched, gathering dust, as if waiting for a day that would never come.
Each swing was a penance, each spark a fleeting memory of happiness lost. The forge's fire, once a source of creation, now felt like the flames of his own personal hell. I've become a recluse, shunning the world that turned its back on me. The walls of my workshop are my only companions, the silence my only solace.
Magnus spent his days in a haze of guilt and sorrow, the rhythmic pounding of his hammer, the only solace he found. Each strike was a desperate attempt to forge a new path, yet he remained trapped in the past. His heart, once filled with the warmth of his craft and the love of his family, had turned to cold, heavy iron. The weight of his grief was a burden he carried alone, a silent testament to a life forever changed. One night, as Magnus drowned his sorrows in ale at the tavern, a hooded figure slipped onto the stool beside him. The stranger reeked of damp earth and something ancient, unsettling. His voice, a raspy whisper, sent shivers down Magnus's spine.
They say there's a treasure, a king's ransom, hidden beneath the earth.
Magnus scoffed, pushing his mug away.
Fairy tales, dead men's whispers.
The stranger chuckled, a dry, brittle sound.
Not whispers, blacksmith. Curses. They say the treasure is guarded by the earth itself, by ancient magic and things best left undisturbed. But you, Magnus Thorn, you're a man who knows loss. A man who might be tempted by a chance for redemption.
He found her on the edge of the village, a solitary figure silhouetted against the dying embers of the sunset. Lilith. Her name was whispered on the wind, a harbinger of shadows and secrets. Her eyes, when she met his gaze, were pools of ancient knowledge, reflecting the dying light with an unsettling intensity.
You seek to outrun your demons, Magnus Thorn.
Magnus swallowed, his throat suddenly dry.
Who are you?
Lilith turned, her face half shrouded in shadow.
I am the key to your redemption. I can lead you to the treasure, but the path is fraught with peril. Are you willing to pay the price, blacksmith?
The air grew heavy as they descended, the scent of damp earth and decay clinging to them like a shroud. Lilith, sure-footed and silent, led the way, her pale hand trailing along the rough-hewn walls. Magnus followed, his heart pounding against his ribs like a blacksmith's hammer. The flickering light of their torch cast grotesque shadows that danced and writhed along the tunnel walls.
What is this place?
Lilith glanced back at him, her eyes glittering in the torchlight.
The belly of the earth, a place where secrets are buried and the past refuses to die.
As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water seeping from the tunnel walls. They emerged into a vast, cavernous chamber, the air thick with the dust of ages. The torchlight flickered, revealing walls adorned with strange symbols and grotesque carvings. Magnus shivered, a primal fear gripping his heart. The air hummed with an unseen energy, a tangible sense of ancient power.
What are these markings?
Magnus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lilith ran a hand along the cold stone, her touch lingering on a particularly disturbing carving.
Warnings.
She replied, her voice echoing in the vast chamber.
and a map for those who can decipher its secrets.
She turned to Magnus, her eyes boring into his.
The treasure lies at the heart of this labyrinth, blacksmith. But be warned, every step you take is a step closer to your salvation, or your doom.
A heavy silence descended upon them as they navigated the labyrinthine passages, the air thick with the weight of centuries past. Each turn brought them face to face with new horrors, relics of a time long forgotten, now twisted and grotesque. Skulls embedded in the walls, their empty sockets staring accusingly, as if judging the intruders. Bones scattered across the floor, picked clean and eerily white. Remnants of lives long extinguished, and always the oppressive silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the pounding of Magnus's heart, echoing in the confined space.
What is this place? Magnus's voice trembled, barely above a whisper.
Magnus stumbled, his hand brushing against something cold and slick, sending a shiver down his spine. He recoiled, his stomach churning with a mix of fear and revulsion. A bone, its surface smooth and polished with time, lay at his feet, a silent testament to the passage of ages. He looked up at Lilith, his eyes wide with fear, seeking some form of reassurance. Lilith said nothing, but a flicker of something akin to amusement crossed her features, a hint of a smirk playing on her lips. She was a creature of this darkness, he realized, at home among the dead, her presence as unsettling as the catacombs themselves. They finally emerged into another chamber, this one smaller, more intimate. A single torch flickered in the center, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed along the walls. But it wasn't the shadows that made Magnus's blood run cold. It was the whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, they seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. As they drew closer, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Pleas for mercy, screams of agony, the tormented cries of the damned.
What is this place?
Magnus staggered back, his hand flying to his ears in a futile attempt to block out the sound.
This is where the truly lost find their final resting place.
Lilith turned to him, her eyes gleaming with an unholy light. The final chamber lay at the end of a long, winding corridor. The air here was heavy, oppressive, charged with a palpable sense of dread. Two massive stone doors, intricately carved with scenes of suffering and despair, barred their way. Magnus ran his hand over the cold, unforgiving stone, his fingers tracing the outlines of tormented faces, of writhing bodies, of unspeakable horrors.
What lies beyond?
Magnus asked, his voice barely a whisper.
The answer you seek. But be warned, Magnus Thorn. Some truths are best left buried.
Lilith stepped forward, her hand hovering over a particularly gruesome carving. With a deafening groan, the doors began to move, their ancient hinges protesting against the intrusion. Slowly, agonizingly, they creaked open, revealing a chamber bathed in an eerie green light. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something unidentifiable but deeply unsettling. In the center, resting on a pedestal of bone, lay a chest, its surface covered in intricate carvings. The treasure. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it were breathing. But Magnus couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and a chill ran down his spine. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and now a new sound reached his ears, footsteps. They seemed to come from all directions, echoing off the stone walls, heavy, measured footsteps echoing from the darkness beyond. Each step was deliberate, as if the unseen presence was in no hurry, savouring the moment.
What is that? Is someone there?
Magnus turned to Lilith, his eyes wide with fear. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Was it excitement?
It seems we are not alone. We must be cautious.
Lilith smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down Magnus's spine. It was a smile that promised danger and perhaps betrayal. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the chamber. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen. Magnus felt a cold hand close around his heart, squeezing the air from his lungs. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he struggled to maintain his composure. He was trapped, caught between the whispers of the damned and whatever lurked in the darkness beyond. The walls seemed to close in on him, the weight of the unknown pressing down. The seed of hope, planted in the fertile ground of his despair, had led him to this. But now that hope seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the encroaching darkness. But was it a path to redemption or a one-way journey into the abyss? The answer lay just beyond the shadows, waiting to be discovered.